Okay, well, thank you very much. As the moderator just said, my name is Bill Principe. I'm a attorney, an OSHA attorney with the law firm Constangy Brooks and Smith. I'm going to be talking to you today about two of the recent amendments to the OSHA record-keeping regulations, and specifically Rule 41 that deals with electronic filing, and Rule 35 that is the anti-retaliation regulation that is particularly controversial. I thought I'd start out with giving you a little bit of background on how we got here. So back in November of 2013, OSHA issued a proposed Rule 41. So this was the electronic submission. And it on its face didn't seem like that would be very controversial. I mean, basically what it was saying is that you would have to, the same forms, the same record-keeping forms, the 300A, the OSHA log, and the 301s would just have to be once a year electronically submitted to OSHA. And so whenever OSHA is proposing a new rule, they first have to send it out to the public and solicit the public's feedback. And so they did that through invitation for written comments, and in January of 2014, they had a public meeting. And as they were discussing the electronic submission, primarily unions expressed concerns about whether, once all this information became posted on OSHA's website, whether some employers might not decide that we don't like what our numbers look like, and so we're going to try to reduce those numbers in some way. So it started out with the OSHA's idea was we want to have everybody's safety record published on our website for all the world to see it. And in part, what OSHA was really hoping for is that by making it so publicly available that people would be, OSHA's word was nudged, or the other word that they used is shamed, into improving your safety program, since all the world was going to be able to compare your safety record against everybody else. So the irony was, it starts out basically being that idea that this is going to be a good thing to post, but then, as I said, as a result of this January 2014 meeting, they started saying, well, people are going to artificially try to keep those numbers down. And so they started saying employers will retaliate in various ways and try to take actions against employees to discourage them from reporting. And so OSHA took that idea back from this January 2014 meeting, and in August of that year, they issued a supplemental notice seeking the public's comment on whether to amend the 1904 regulations to prohibit employees from taking adverse actions against employees who report their injuries or illness. So OSHA finally, earlier this year in May, issued these two new rules, the electronic filing Rule 41 and Rule 35, and actually Rule 36 as well. We're not going to cover Rule 36 today because all it really does is it just says that you have a substantive right, employees, that employers can't discriminate against you for reporting. And that really will be covered in Rule 35. So the Rule 35, I want to just highlight it right now, and then we'll talk in more detail about Rule 41, and we'll come back to Rule 35. So Rule 35 is sort of innocently titled employee involvement, but this is the anti-retaliation rule. And so basically it has a couple parts. There are 4 provisions, but the most important of the provisions is really 4. Do not discharge or in any manner discriminate against any employee for reporting a work-related injury or illness. And so this is the retaliation provision, or the anti-retaliation provision, that is so controversial. So we'll talk a good bit about that. And as you can see, what I've got on the screen here is that's the entire requirement in Rule 35, and you'll see that it doesn't literally say anything about drug testing, about post-accident drug testing. It doesn't say anything about the use of safety incentive programs that are tied to numbers, tied to your safety numbers, and it doesn't say anything about timely reporting policies. And yet those are the things that are making this rule so controversial. So we'll talk about what OSHA means or what their rules are at this point for post-accident drug testing and safety incentive programs and timely reporting. But just understand at the front end that this is the total language of this rule. It just says don't discharge or discriminate against anybody because they report an injury. So let's start first with Rule 41 because it's really pretty straightforward. So the idea is that there are three primary record-keeping forms. We start out with the OSHA 300 log, and then for each entry that is going to be on the OSHA 300 log, you are presently required to maintain a 301 form report. The rules allow you to use an alternative form, and so some of you may be using your state first report of injury, which is fine as long as the state first report of injury form has all the same information on the 301. And then finally, there is the 300A, or the annual summary, that all of you are going to be preparing during the month of January, which will summarize what took place in 2016 on your OSHA 300 log. So OSHA has divided up this requirement for electronic submission into really two groups. And so the first group is establishments with 250 or more employees, and the second group is establishments with between 20 and 249 employees, but only for those industries that are listed in Appendix A. So our first point that I want you to understand about this requirement is the use of the word establishment. The word establishment refers to a single physical location. So in other words, when we're talking about this, whether you're over 250 or whether you're between 20 and 249, our starting point is that this is only an establishment requirement. So in other words, you do not look company-wide in figuring out this number. So if you have 1,000 employees at your location, across your company, but it's spread out so that you don't have more than 249 at any one of your many different locations, then each of those separate locations is an establishment, and unless an establishment has more than 250 employees, then this requirement wouldn't apply, or at least the requirements to deal with the big employers, the ones that have 250 or more employees at a given site. So let's start first a little and explain a little bit of OSHA's rationale for this electronic filing or reporting requirement. In OSHA's words, it was to enable it to use enforcement and compliance assistant resources more efficiently. In other words, if they can get a picture of what's going on at your place or in your industry, then they can figure out where they should be doing inspections. Truthfully, the head of OSHA, in speeches and in written statements that he's been giving, he actually says that one of the big values of having this posted on OSHA's website is that employees would then be able to go to the website and figure out a safe place to work. I have my doubts as to whether many employees are going to be motivated to use this information that way. And so really the more believable explanation is if they collect all this information, it will allow them to target inspections. You know, obviously one of the real unknowns is the new president-elect and whether the OSHA budget will be reduced as it was when President Reagan was elected in 1980. When the OSHA budget was cut in 1980, it resulted in reductions in force by the agency. So they had fewer inspectors. And if you think about the use of this electronic filing, they'll be gathering a lot of new information. And so they're going to have the resources for somebody to analyze all this information coming in, because the reporting requirements, as you know, have changed. And as of the beginning of 2015, you're now required to call up OSHA and let them know when even a single one of your employees, or if it's a temporary worker who's being supervised, you got to call OSHA and tell them if your employee has been admitted to a hospital, or if they've had an amputation, or if they've lost an eye. And so OSHA is getting a tremendous number of calls of these cases, and this is prompting a lot of inspections that wouldn't necessarily have been occurring but for this new rule. And so now on top of all that new reporting, you have this electronic filing that's going to take place. And so I have my doubts, at least for a while, about what use OSHA will really be able to make of all this new information that's going to be coming in. But their main rationale, as I said, was to make this a public record, and by sort of there for all the world for unions or for your competitors or for employees, you can go online eventually and look up every company's record. And OSHA assumed that there would be a certain amount of pressure so that this public disclosure would nudge you or shame you into improving the workplace safety at your locations. So if you are one of these